The knock came at 9:47 on a Tuesday night. Staff Sergeant Jacob Torres had just finished his third cup of coffee, sitting alone in his kitchen in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at a photograph he kept in a drawer and only looked at once a year. The photo showed a dusty village square in Kandahar Province, 2012. In the center, barely visible through the smoke and chaos, was a small boy covered in blood, eyes wide with terror, reaching toward the camera, toward him. Jacob had saved that boy's life, performed a field tracheotomy with a ballpoint pen, stopped the bleeding with his bare hands, carried him 2 miles through enemy fire to the medevac zone. The boy survived. Jacob went home, and for 11 years, he told himself that was enough, that he'd done his job, that the boy was probably living a good life somewhere, far from war, far from memory. Then the knock came, and when Jacob opened the door, the man standing there had the same eyes from the photograph. Older now, but unmistakable. And the first words out of his mouth were not "thank you." They were, "I'm sorry." Welcome to Secret Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of sacrifice, hidden truths, and promises that transcend borders and time, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that subscribe button. Let's honor the bonds that war creates and the truths that take years to surface. Jacob Torres had been medically retired from the Army in 2015. Honorable discharge, full benefits, a Bronze Star for valor. But the medals sat in a box in his closet, and the certificate hung in a frame he never looked at. He worked now as a paramedic for the Phoenix Fire Department, saved lives on American streets instead of Afghan battlefields, traded his combat uniform for navy blue polyester, traded the weight of an M4 rifle for the weight of medical equipment. But some nights, when the calls came in, when the blood smelled a certain way or the dust kicked up just right, he was back there, back in that village, back with that boy. The day it happened was July 14th, 2012. His unit, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, had been conducting a patrol through a village outside Kandahar when the ambush hit. RPGs, small arms fire, chaos. The Taliban had been waiting. Intel had been wrong. His squad took cover behind a mud wall, returning fire, calling for air support. That's when Jacob heard it. Not gunfire, not explosions. A child screaming. He looked over the wall and saw the boy, maybe 7 years old, lying in the middle of the square. Shrapnel wounds, neck bleeding, choking on his own blood. No one else moved. The shooting was too heavy, the risk too great. But Jacob didn't think. He just ran. He covered the distance in seconds, sliding next to the boy like a baseball player stealing home. Bullets kicked up dust around them. He assessed the wound. Trachea compromised, airway closing. The boy's eyes locked onto his, full of terror and something else. Trust. Jacob pulled out his med kit, realized he didn't have a track tube, and made a decision that would haunt his dreams for over a decade. He took apart a ballpoint pen, sterilized the tube with hand sanitizer, and cut into the boy's throat with his field knife. The boy's body convulsed. Blood sprayed. Jacob inserted the pen tube, sealed the wound with his fingers, and breathed for the boy until his lungs inflated. It worked. The boy gasped, coughed, lived. But Jacob couldn't stay. The firefight was intensifying. He lifted the boy onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry and ran. 68 pounds of dying child and 80 pounds of gear. 2 miles to the extraction point. Under fire the entire way. He didn't remember most of it. Just the weight. Just the breathing. Just the thought that if he stopped, if he slowed down, if he failed, this kid would die. And for some reason, that mattered more than anything else in the world. When they reached the medevac bird, Jacob handed the boy to the flight medic, collapsed onto the ground, and vomited from exhaustion. He never saw the boy again, never learned his name, never knew if he lived or died beyond that helicopter ride. Until 11 years later, when the man with those same eyes appeared at his door. The man standing on Jacob's porch was in his late teens now, maybe 20. Thin but strong. He wore jeans, a gray hoodie, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. His English was accented but clear. "I'm sorry," he said again. Jacob stared, unable to speak. The man reached into his pocket slowly, carefully, and pulled out a photograph. It was the same one Jacob kept in his drawer. Same village, same smoke, same moment. But this photo was taken from a different angle, and in it, Jacob's face was visible, covered in dust and blood, but unmistakable. "Where did you get this?" Jacob whispered. The man's expression didn't change. "My uncle took it, right before he died." Jacob's stomach dropped. "Your uncle?" The man nodded. He was the one who called in the ambush. He was Taliban. The words hit like a physical blow. Jacob stepped back, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The man held up his hands. "Please, let me explain." Jacob's mind raced. This was impossible. The boy he saved, the child he risked everything for, was the nephew of an insurgent, was part of the network that tried to kill his squad. He should slam the door, call the police, report this. But he didn't, because the man's eyes weren't hostile. They were pleading, and Jacob had spent 11 years wondering. So he stepped aside. "Come in." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The man introduced himself as Farid. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if every word had been rehearsed. "I was 7 years old that day. My uncle, Rashid, he brought me to the village to visit my grandmother. He told me to stay inside. But I was a child. I didn't listen. I ran outside when I heard the helicopters. I wanted to see the Americans. I had never seen them up close. That's when the shooting started. That's when the shrapnel hit me." Jacob listened, jaw clenched. Farid continued. "My uncle watched you save me. He saw you risk your life. He saw your face. And after that day, he changed. He didn't fight anymore. He turned himself into your base 3 weeks later. He gave up names, locations, weapons caches. He helped your military capture 15 Taliban fighters. And then he disappeared." Jacob leaned forward. "Why? Why would he do that?" Farid's eyes glistened. "Because you saved his nephew. You saved me. You were the enemy. You had every reason to let me die. But you didn't. And my uncle said that if the enemy valued life more than he did, then he was fighting for the wrong side." Jacob felt something crack inside his chest. He had carried guilt for years. Guilt for the men he couldn't save. Guilt for the faces he forgot. Guilt for coming home when others didn't. But this was different. This was a life saved that changed another life. A ripple he never saw. Farid reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My uncle wrote this before he disappeared. He wanted you to have it. But I didn't know your name. I didn't know where you were. I only had the photograph. It took me 6 years to find you." Jacob unfolded the letter. It was handwritten in English, shaky but legible. "To the American soldier who saved my nephew, you gave me back my family. You gave me back my faith in humanity. I do not know if you believe in God, but I believe God sent you that day. Not as a soldier, but as a man. I have done terrible things. I have taken lives. But because of you, I stopped. I cannot undo my past, but I can choose my future. Thank you for showing me there is another way. May peace find you. Rashid." Jacob's hands trembled. He read it 3 times. Then he looked up at Farid. "Why now? Why come here after all these years?" Farid wiped his eyes. Because you need to know. You saved more than my life that day. You saved my uncle's soul, and I needed to tell you that before it's too late." Jacob didn't understand. Too late for what? Fareed took a breath. "I'm sick. Leukemia. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. I'm in the United States for treatment. Experimental trials. It's my last chance. And before I die, I needed to find you. I needed to say thank you. And I needed to tell you the truth." Jacob felt the room tilt. This man, this boy he saved, was dying. And he'd spent his final months searching for the American medic who once shoved a pen into his throat and breathed life back into his lungs. "Why didn't you just call?" "Email?" Fareed smiled faintly. "Because some things you have to say in person. Because I needed to see your face. Because my uncle taught me that gratitude without presence is just words." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Jacob asked the question he'd been too afraid to ask for 11 years. "Do you remember it? The day I saved you?" Fareed nodded. "Every second. I remember your eyes. I remember thinking they were kind, even though you were covered in blood. I remember you whispering to me in a language I didn't understand, but I knew you were telling me I'd be okay. I remember the pain. And I remember waking up in a hospital and asking where the American soldier went. But no one knew. You were gone." Jacob swallowed hard. "I thought you died. I thought the medevac didn't make it in time. I carried that for years." Fareed shook his head. "I lived. I went to school. I learned English. I studied medicine because of you. I wanted to save lives the way you saved mine. But the cancer came, and now I don't know if I'll ever get the chance." Jacob stood up abruptly. "Come with me." Fareed followed him through the house to the garage. Jacob opened a cabinet and pulled out his old medic bag, the same one he'd carried in Afghanistan. He unzipped it and pulled out the pen. The same ballpoint pen he'd used to perform the tracheotomy. He'd kept it all these years, dried blood still faint on the plastic. "I never threw it away," Jacob said quietly. "I didn't know why. I just couldn't." Fareed stared at it, then looked up at Jacob with tears streaming down his face. "You kept it." Jacob nodded. "I kept it because it reminded me that I did something right. That in the middle of all that death, I gave someone a chance. And now you're telling me that chance meant more than I ever knew." They spent the next 4 hours talking. Fareed told Jacob about his life after the war, about his grandmother who raised him, about the nightmares he still had, about the scar on his neck that he wore like a badge of honor, about his dream of becoming a doctor, about the moment he found out he was sick and how the first thing he thought of was finding the American who saved him. Jacob told Fareed about his own struggles, the PTSD, the sleepless nights, the guilt, the feeling that no matter how many lives he saved as a paramedic, it would never be enough. And Fareed looked at him and said something that would change everything. "You already did enough. You gave me 11 years I wouldn't have had. Every day I lived was because of you. That's not a debt. That's a gift." Before Fareed left, Jacob asked where he was staying. "A hostel downtown. It's cheap." Jacob shook his head. "No. You're staying here." Fareed tried to refuse, but Jacob insisted. "You came halfway around the world to find me. The least I can do is give you a place to sleep." So Fareed stayed. 1 night turned into 1 week. 1 week turned into 3. They became something neither of them expected. Friends. Brothers. Fareed started his treatment at the local cancer center. Jacob drove him to every appointment, sat with him through every infusion, held his hand when the pain got too bad. And slowly, they both began to heal wounds that had nothing to do with bullets or disease. But the cancer was aggressive. The treatment wasn't working. By the Third month, the doctors gave Fareed the news. There was nothing more they could do. Fareed took it calmly, like he'd always known it would end this way. Jacob didn't. He raged. He called every specialist he could find. He researched experimental treatments. He begged the VA for help. But deep down, he knew. This was a battle they were going to lose. One night, Fareed sat Jacob down and said, "Stop fighting. I didn't come here to be saved again. I came here to give you peace. And I have. You need to let me go." Jacob couldn't speak. He just held Fareed's hand and cried for the first time in 15 years. Fareed passed away on a cold morning in December, 3 days before Christmas. Jacob was with him, holding his hand, whispering the same words he'd whispered in that village square 11 years earlier. "You're going to be okay." And this time, he believed it. Because Fareed wasn't alone. He wasn't dying in a war zone. He was dying in peace, surrounded by someone who loved him. And that mattered. After Fareed's death, Jacob arranged for his body to be sent home to Afghanistan, to be buried next to his uncle Rashid. He paid for everything: the casket, the flight, the funeral. It was the least he could do. And when the paperwork was done, he sat in his kitchen, staring at the photograph one last time. But now it looked different. Not like a moment of chaos, but like the beginning of something. A promise made in the dust and kept across continents and years. Jacob went back to work, back to saving lives. But something had shifted. The weight was lighter. The guilt was quieter. Because Fareed had given him something no medal or commendation ever could. Purpose. Proof that what he did mattered. That the boy he saved didn't just survive. He thrived. He lived. He loved. He gave back. And even though his life was cut short, it was a life worth saving. And that was enough. 6 months after Fareed's death, Jacob received a package from Afghanistan. Inside was a letter from Fareed's grandmother. It was written in Pashto, but a translator at the VA helped him read it. She thanked him for being there at the end. She thanked him for giving Fareed a family when he had none. And she told him something he didn't know. Rashid's letter, the one Fareed had given Jacob, wasn't the only one. There was a second letter, one Rashid had written to Fareed before he disappeared. And in it, he made his nephew promise one thing. "If you ever find the American who saved you, tell him he saved me too. Tell him that mercy is stronger than war. Tell him I died believing in peace because of him." Jacob read those words over and over until they blurred. He thought about Rashid, a man he never met. A man who tried to kill him. A man who changed because of a single act of compassion in the middle of violence. He thought about Fareed, a boy who became a man, who crossed the world to say thank you and ended up giving more than he received. And he thought about himself, a medic who carried guilt like armor, who thought saving one life in a war didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than he ever imagined, because that life touched another, and that life touched another. And the ripples kept going long after the dust settled. Jacob never remarried, never had children. But he didn't feel alone, because he carried Fareed with him, in every patient he treated, in every hand he held, in every life he fought for. He started a foundation in Fareed's name, providing medical scholarships to refugees and immigrants who wanted to become healthcare workers. He told Fareed's story to anyone who would listen, not for recognition, but because people needed to hear it, needed to know that enemies can become brothers. That war doesn't have to be the end, that a single moment of humanity can change the trajectory of lives you'll never see. Years later, a journalist asked Jacob if he regretted going back to that village, if he regretted saving Fareed knowing what he knew now. Jacob didn't hesitate. No, because that's not how this works. You don't save someone because of what they might become or who they're related to. You save them because they're human, because in that moment, they need you. And if you start picking and choosing who deserves to be saved, you've already lost. Fareed taught me that. He reminded me why I became a medic in the first place. Not to fight, but to heal. So now I ask you, have you ever done something good and never knew the impact? Have you ever wondered if the lives you touched remembered you? Share your story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Because here at Secret Human Stories, we believe that every act of kindness creates a ripple, and some ripples take years to come back. But when they do, they change everything. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Help us honor the bonds that transcend borders, the promises made in the dust, and the proof that mercy is stronger than war. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, if you ever have the chance to save a life, don't hesitate. You never know whose world you're changing.